the Lancet Commission on Medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust, the German launch here in Berlin. 5 days ago, we did a global launch in Vienna, and here we are doing the second, hoping that in 2024 there will be many more launches all around the world. The task of the Commission was, as you can see, or you could see at the former slide, can you bring back the one? Or I can do it actually. Here you go. To gather historical evidence, tease out implications for today, and then draft education for tomorrow. And you have all this information in your booklet, okay? The report itself, an editorial by Richard Horton, the Lancet editor, and Miriam Sabin, our beloved personal editor of the Commission. There is also a comment by our Students Advisory Committee that you will hear about more subsequently. A comment by 19 of the 20 members of the Commission that addresses the current crisis in Israel and Gaza. We felt that we cannot turn a blind eye to it. And then a profile, which happens to be my profile, and it's in your booklet. What I would like to do first is to introduce, I'm one of the co-chairs. Let me introduce the two others. The first, Professor Sabine Hildenbrandt, maybe you can stand up, an anatomist from the department, from the Division of General Pediatrics, Department of Pediatrics in Boston's General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, Boston, Massachusetts, USA. The second, Professor Herwig Czech, a professor of the history of medicine in the Medical University of Vienna, Austria. I am Shmuel Pinchas Rice. I'm a family physician. Clinically, I am affiliated with Clalit Health Services in Israel, and academically with two institutions, the Center for Medical Education in the Hebrew University, Hadassah Faculty of Medicine in Jerusalem, and the Department of Technological Innovations in the Holon Institute of Technology. And I would like also to acknowledge two very important people who made this day possible. First, Volker Rolke, Professor Rolke, who for health reasons is not able to join us in the last moment. Initially, he was one of the co-chairs, and then he was replaced by Herwig. He actually organized the meeting today together with Professor Carola Sachs, and I think he deserved a special applause. And then Carola herself, which is going to come here in a second, which was the other organizer. Thank you, Carola, to you and Volker for making this happen in this amazing venue. You can feel history descending on you the minute you come in. Please.
Thank you, Shmuel. Well, I'm Carola Sachs, as he told you, a professor emerita from the University of Vienna, and I organized this local event together with my colleague Volker Rolke. We both, he from his hotel room, would like to thank you and our distinguished speakers for responding to our request for a greeting or a comment on our report. Thank you all here in this lecture hall and online for accepting our invitation. I'm honored to be your moderator for the first part of this intensive afternoon program. And Sabine Hildenbrandt will replace Volker Rolke for the second part on the halfway through this program. Allow me at the beginning a brief remark on my own motivation for participating in this commission. As I'm neither a doctor nor a medical educator and not even a specialist in the history of medicine. I'm a contemporary historian, interested in sciences and politics in the ages of extremes, which, contrary to what we hoped not long ago, we have by no means left behind us. One experience in my work on science and National Socialism was decisive for my participation in this commission. It was the meeting with 8 survivors of the medical experiments in the concentration camps, among them several so-called Mengele twins. They had been invited in 2001, that's also a long time ago, to participate in a symposium of the Max Planck Society and as addressees of an apology that the then President, Hubert Markel, offered to these guests of honor and to all victims of Nazi medical crimes. One of their spokespersons, Jona Lacks, whom you will see later in a video, told us very clearly that apologies and historical reconstruction were not enough. What would matter in the future, when the survivors can no longer speak to us themselves, is this, and I cite Jona Lacks: we are asking you to remember what you want to clear up and then perhaps forget. We, the survivors, will remember in any case. Will you forget in any case? The survivors asked us for a living memory of what bioscientists and doctors had done to them, in the name of scientific and medical progress and for the alleged good of a people from which they themselves had been brutally excluded. I see our report as an important contribution to the fulfillment of this mission. It is intended to enable the vivid and responsible memory of the medical crimes and the vivid remembrance of their victims, especially in the spheres of bioscience and medicine, where it's needed first and foremost, and where it can be effective for all human beings. And that is in the education for future generations of bioscientists and health professionals, wherever it is practiced, especially, of course, in Germany, but also in other regions of this globe. And in this sense, and with this hope, I now present to you Miriam Sabin, how should I say, good fairy of our commission, or to be more precisely, the most qualified and efficient pilot guiding us through the perils of completing such a report and publishing it in that distinguished medium that the Lancet is. Please, Miriam.
Thank you so much, Carola, for that lovely introduction. It's such a pleasure to be with you today, and just wanted to make a few remarks. First, on behalf of the Lancet and our editor-in-chief, Richard Horton, I am delighted to talk about this important launch. I would like to first, however, acknowledge the participation of many of our Israeli commissioners who are joining us from Israel online. They were unable to attend due to the war that started with Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th, but they're very much here with us online and in spirit. As Shmuel mentioned, I would also like to draw your attention to the information in the booklet, which is also available on the Lancet.com's website, along with all our other commissions, and you'll be able to find our editorial and the report there, and the statement that the commissioners wrote, as Shmuel mentioned. It will also be on the actual commission's website as well, and they will be updating that with, for example, the launches and other information. So the Lancet is celebrating its 200th year as a weekly general medical journal. I have not worked there that long, though, please say. Along with the research we publish every week here, editors can convene world experts, such as our learned commissioners, who you're being introduced to, the experts in their fields, to call attention to important new evidence, to address gaps, and to make concrete recommendations that can change current thinking or clinical practice. We are privileged to be able to address the most pressing health issues today, but also, in the case of why we are here today, the most important issues in the history of medicine. Because for the first time, a Lancet Commission is dedicated to the history of medicine, Nazi medicine. The report, the Lancet Commission on Medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust, Historical Evidence, Implications for Today, Teaching for Tomorrow. This report, as you've heard, launched on November 9th in Vienna, and it is the most up-to-date scholarly evidence on the history of Nazi medicine and its central role in the so-called final solution, the German government's plan to annihilate European Jewry. 6 million Jews were murdered, along with 250,000 to 500,000 Roma and Sinti people, gay men, political prisoners, institutionalized people, people with disabilities, and others. The commissioners consider the report necessary due to the decades-long post-war refusal of the medical community to engage with this history in Germany and worldwide, and the long-standing myths about the relation between the Nazi regime and medicine. The Commission also calls for this history to be taught within all health education curricula. As we wrote in the Lancet's editorial, this Lancet Commission is an example for all health professionals that truth and reconciliation may also be possible. German commissioners, some the children of Nazi-era parents and others from former Nazi-occupied countries, and Jewish people from the USA and Israel, some the children and grandchildren of Holocaust victims and survivors, worked side by side to wrestle with this history and its implications for the health profession today. An International Medical Student Advisory Council provided a fresh view on the relevance of medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust, and were a future-oriented and optimistic presence. And I should say that as the Lancet editor accompanying this, I am also Jewish and had family who sadly perished in the Holocaust, so this was an incredibly meaningful piece of work for me, and just a beautiful thing to see people working together on this important subject so closely and successfully. So last week, we had the global launch of the Commission, as I mentioned, and the launch conveyed the main messages of the report. Now, we also had a discussion that followed, a symposium to delve further into the report, but today is the part 2. Today is about accountability. Every Lancet report contains recommendations and expectations about what each commission hopes will be the follow-on effects of their efforts. We are all here with an extraordinary opportunity to hear about the report's recommendations and, critically, how important biomedical institutions and societies are reflecting on the report and their role in how these institutions might take up these recommendations. This is where the real work begins. Lancet commissions aren't reports that are then put on a shelf. They are about action. Over the course of the next 2 hours, I look forward to hearing how we can move forward together to, 1, bring the most up-to-date history of medicine during the Nazi era and the Holocaust into the general consciousness, 2, discuss the implications for today and the importance of teaching this history to health professionals, and 3, ensuring accountability for any future research that is needed in this area and for the report's recommendations. So I look forward to this important moment today and to this beginning of our dialogue together. Thank you.
We now will listen to the greetings of our esteemed co-host of this launch event. The first of these is the famous Charité University Medicine Berlin, which allowed us to present our report here in its historical lecture hall. The Charité is represented here by its Chief Executive Officer, Hajo Krömer. Professor Krömer is a pharmacologist and specialized in toxicology. He served for many years as professor for pharmacology and as the dean of medical schools of several German universities. In 2019, he was appointed chairman of the Charité, and I invite him to come to step forward.
Professor Reis, Professor Sachse, ladies and gentlemen, as CEO of Charité, it's my pleasure to welcome this unique crowd of people at a unique occasion and at a unique place. This is the lecture hall of Rudolf Virchow. If you look up to the side, you'll see a photo of Virchow lecturing a male-only audience a very long time ago. He was unique in that he was the person who realized that most diseases originate in cells on one hand, and the other thing which was unique with him, that he was the first who really realized that medicine is a social science and has social impact. So he was a professor of pathology at Charité, and at the same time he was a member of the parliament. So really a unique combination. And this lecture hall was bombed at the end of World War II, was then forgotten for a long time. Was in the beginning of the century kind of a bit renovated, and it was now just 2 or 3 months ago completely renovated again, and it's a place for Charité together in view of history. And so I'm really pleased to welcome you here today in these ruins. It's a pleasure to welcome you gathering on the presentation of the Lancet report on medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust, which really comprehensively analyzes the role of medicine in National Socialism. We had last week a couple of gatherings here, because as you may know, last week had a special date in German history, which is November 9th, which is on one hand associated with political developments. In 1918, we had the first democracy originating. In 89, we had the falling of the wall here. And in 1938, related to today's topic, was the so-called Reichspogromnacht or Reichskristallnacht, as an organized and directed violence against Jewish women and men in Germany by the National Socialist regime. We're now on the day, almost on the date, 85 years later, we're again witnessing terrible and massive attacks on our friends and colleagues in Israel, and also we again shockingly observe increasing anti-Semitism as an issue in Germany. And I think both the relation to history and the current events together underscore the importance of engaging in historical and political educational work regarding these crimes against humanity during the Nazi era and their relationship to things which happen today, and to answer the question, what lessons for contemporary medicine can be drawn from your insights. For my organization, Charité, it's a really central concern to convey science and responsible science to students and employees, and we do that in research, teaching, patient care, and translation. And this also includes to engage and interact and look at the darkest chapters of Charité's history. We do that, and goes to the credit of my predecessor, Karl Einhäupel, in various issues. Over the street, there's the Clinic of Psychiatry. It hosts an exhibition on the history of Charité during the Nazi era. If you just have some time, you can walk over and look at that. I think it's an interesting It's an interesting exhibition. And we also have a remembrance trail here at Charité, which reminds to the colleagues which had been kicked out of this academic medical center during the Nazi time. So we on a day-to-day basis remember and get remembered to that time, and therefore really appreciate your work. We'll carefully study the recommendations of the Lancet Commission on how this topic can be integrated in contemporary form of daily training, further education of doctors and nurses, and the development of teaching formats. And therefore, we at Charité are deeply grateful for the Commission and also for the Lancet, or to the Lancet, for your work. I would like to wish you a thoughtful meeting on one hand, and I hope that you contribute, or you're able to make a large contribution of transforming memory into concurrent education. Thank you for your attention.
Our second institutional co-host is the Robert Koch Institute, which supported this launch with a generous grant. Its new president since October 2023 is Professor Lars Schade. He received a doctorate in medicine with special expertise in microbiology and infectious disease epidemiology. Since 2010, Lars Schade served as head of the Robert Koch Institute's Center of Biological Threats and Special Pathogens, and since 2011 as its vice president, but now he is the president of the Robert Koch Institute. So please. Okay.
Dear Professor Reis, dear Professor Sachse, dear members of the Lancet Commission, dear colleagues. As the president of the Robert Koch Institute in Berlin, Germany's National Public Health Institute, which was funded in 1891, I'm pleased that our institute is co-hosting today's launch event because we have indeed a historical responsibility. The era of National Socialism was a dark chapter in our institute's history. Between 1933 and 1945, a state-funded public health research institution as the RKI was closely integrated within the Nazis' oppressive political agenda. In the spring of 1933, all Jewish scientists were forced to leave our institute. Among them was a 38-year-old specialist in internal medicine and pediatrics. Her name was Lucy Adelsberger. Despite having a job offer at the medical faculty of Harvard University, she remained with her mother, who was sick, and continued to treat her patients in Berlin, even after the Nazis had revoked her license to practice medicine, and she was not only allowed and then she was only allowed to call herself a Krankenbehandler, the German word, or treater of the sick. In May 1943, she was deported to Auschwitz, where she was forced to work as a prisoner's doctor in the gypsies and women's camp at Birkenau. She was liberated shortly before the end of the war from an external camp of the Ravensbrück concentration camp. In 1946, Lucy Adelsberger emigrated to the USA. She worked at the Montefiore Hospital in New York as a physician and cancer researcher. Her memoirs of Auschwitz, which are also mentioned and cited in the present Lancet report, are a moving testament of the Holocaust. Already in March 1946, she published in the Lancet a very personal article about her medical observations in Auschwitz concentration camp. And I just want to quote the first two sentences from this article. She wrote, "I was arrested in May 1943 and I was sent to the Birkenau concentration camp. This was a climax to a series of restrictions that began in March 1933 with my removal from the post of the Robert Koch Institute Berlin because I was a Jewess." We cannot change the events of the past, but we can confront our past, and we should learn from it and also remind people of it. And I think the current global political situation shows how necessary this reflection is. I'm looking forward to the further course of this Lancet event. Thank you.
Our third co-host is the Max Planck Society, which generously supported the work of our commission, as well as this launch of our report today in various ways. As representative of the Max Planck Society today and as chairperson of its Human Sciences section, we welcome Professor Arno Villringer. He is a neurologist and neuroscientist with earlier stations at universities in Germany and the United States. Now he is a director of the Department of Neurology at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences and of the Clinic for Cognitive Neurology at the University Hospital in Leipzig. Please, Mr. Villringer.
Dear members of the Lancet Commission, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Max Planck Society, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you attending this special event. The subject matter explored by the Lancet Commission is affecting, moving and harrowing against the shameful backdrop of Jewish fellow citizens in our country, in this city, once again facing threats and defamation. The Commission's report offers a meaningful opportunity to reflect anew on the horror of the Holocaust. Thank you for shedding light on this crucial issue. The topic holds particular significance for the Max Planck Society due to our history, and we are honored to support the work of the Lancet Commission on Medicine, Nazism and the Holocaust and today's event. The concept of non-university basic research, which the Max Planck Society embodies today, dates back more than 100 years to the Kaiser Wilhelm Society, founded here in Berlin in 1911. It introduced a new pillar within the architecture of German scientific system, which soon proved to be pivotal. Following the collapse of the Nazi state, the Max Planck Society emerged during the establishment of West German democracy as a successor to the Kaiser Wilhelm Society. The motivation behind this reorganization directly leads us into the topic that will occupy us further today. On the one hand, the KWG, Kaiser Wilhelm Society, was successful in terms of scientific achievements and recognition through prestigious awards such as Nobel Prize. However, given its extensive collaboration with the Nazi regime and its involvement in heinous crimes against humanity, its continuation was inconceivable. First, the Western Allies insisted on the dissolution primarily due to its military research that facilitated Germany's aggressive and racially motivated war of annihilation. Today, however, we are also aware of its collaboration in the fields of biological and life sciences, research closely related to humans. We know that researchers within the Kaiser Wilhelm Society contributed to scientifically legitimizing the inhumane system of National Socialism, unscrupulously exploiting it for their own research goals, for instance by obtaining tissue samples from victims murdered in concentration camps or medical facilities and nursing homes. This knowledge demands a special responsibility from us, which extends not only to the past and to the people who survived or fell victim to the Nazi terror, but also to the present and the future. History teaches us the importance of being vigilant about where our research conducted across 85 institutes may encounter ethical boundaries. In the 80s, Max Planck President Heinz Stab aptly called for a responsible self-constraint in research. About 1/3 of our institutes, which are located in Germany, but also in Italy, Netherlands, and the USA, are engaged in life sciences, which hold particular relevance for medicine. However, it is essential for all our institutes and scientists in the natural sciences, computer science, think of AI and the discussions about it, as well as in the humanities and social sciences, to confront ethical questions. Discussing these matters today is crucial for our Max Planck Society, committed through its work to the public good and the fundamental principles of our democratic state. And I'm pleased to be able to participate in this conversation. Thank you.
Yes, perhaps. Huh? You can. Yeah, perhaps it's better. Yeah, yeah, it's difficult for people to read. Yeah. Okay. Our last speaker in this first section and representing the broad university landscape of Berlin is Professor Günther Ziegler. He is a distinguished mathematician and science communicator who earned his doctorate at MIT in 1987. He has been teaching for nearly 3 decades at the Technical University and the Free University in Berlin. Since 2018, he has been serving as the president of the Free University Berlin, and 1 year later, he became the first speaker of the Berlin University Alliance. So please, Mr. Ziegler.
This is also the usual misspelling of my name with the H in the Günther, but it's a pleasure to be here. Professor Reis, Professor Sachse, the Lancet Commission, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to welcome you and to greet you in behalf of the Berlin University Alliance, on behalf of the Freie Universität Berlin, and in some sense also connecting the various institutions. As you may know, the Charité is the joint medical department of Freie Universität and of Humboldt-Universität, and on the other hand, the Freie Universität has property in Dahlem, which it in some sense inherited from the Kaiser Wilhelm Gesellschaft, now Max Planck Gesellschaft. And this also connects us and our property with actually, as one mentioned, the darkest chapters of our history, and also shows our historical responsibility. The special incident that sort of got us into the whole story is that in July 2014, during construction works on the boundary of the property Inestraße 22, Inestraße 22, which is now the Otto Suhr Institute for Political Sciences, but used to be the property and the building of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity and Eugenics. Bones were found, including a large part of human bones. And from the beginning, it was clear that this could and probably would be connected to the former Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology and its crimes. Now, these bones and these findings have been researched in great detail and with great care by a commission put together by my predecessor as president of Freie Universität, Peter André Alt. And I will not reconstruct the whole process that led us to understand these findings and which in the end led to a burial of the bones that were found there in March of this year. The Lancet Commission was our guest this morning and did a site visit to the institute and also to the plans that we have there. It was important to us at the time that the decisions of how to deal with the findings, which turned out to be roughly 16,000 bone fragments from at least 54 individuals, but probably much more, was done together with the German Council of Jews and the Council of Sinti and Roma, where in the end the decision was to at some point not do any further investigations on the bones and not to try and separate them into where they would come from, but to find a joint, non-religious and non-Eurocentric burial for these bones. What was clear, however, from the investigations, the archaeological investigations, that all of these bones were remains of victims. Victims of crimes done in the name of science, whether these crimes came from colonial times, and this may have been colonial victims, or whether it was victims from Nazi crimes. And as you may know, that institute was connected to Auschwitz and to medical experiments done in Auschwitz. So part of these bones may as well be from victims of the Auschwitz concentration camps or from research done at the Institute on victims from Auschwitz or other camps. So what did we find out? We did find out that in the end, from what we could research, we do not know the names, we don't know the faces, we don't know the identities of the victims, but we know that this was victims of crimes committed in the name of science. And that's also what we put on the tombstone for the burial. This is victims of crimes committed in the name of science. And this is heinous crimes, and it's crimes over which no grass can grow, and where it's our responsibility to remember, and it's our responsibility to remind of these crimes. And this will happen not only at the graveyard, but also at the site of these crimes, as far as they are given by this former Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. So there will be a memorial site opened with an exhibition in the course of next year. The historical responsibility for murderous research that occurred in the past never ends. And critical reflection on research processes and the ethical responsibility they entail also needs to be an essential part of the academic training of students and of junior researchers here and now and always, and in the medical sciences as well as in the political sciences and in sociology and in all the topics that we treat at the university. At Freie Universität, we will always be vigilant that no grass will grow over these heinous deeds committed in the name of science. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all our speakers in this first part. We now go on to the second part of this launch event with the the presentation of our report in 3 portions, as you can see in the undertitle of the name of our report. So we start with the historical evidence, and the historical evidence we put together in our report will be presented to you by Professor Herwig Czech, my Viennese colleague and historian in medicine. So please, and the co-chair, of course, of our commission.
Thank you, Carola. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this second of our launch events, and in many aspects the most important one. And I would thank you both for those who are present here in this truly extraordinary venue. Professor Krömer has already talked about the significance of this place. And I would also like to explicitly thank all of you who are following us today on our live stream, including for reasons that are rather unfortunate. Our Lancet report consists of 3 core elements, and these are reflected in the subtitle that you have probably had opportunity to study: historical evidence, implications for today, teaching for tomorrow. And of which Carola Sachse has already announced it. It is my pleasure today to present to you the first of these 3, the historical evidence that is contained in the report, which constitutes part 1 and 2. The main goal of these sections is to provide global readership of the Lancet. I think that's not an exaggeration to say. The global readership of the Lancet with a compendium, up-to-date, verified information. And it's also important, I think, at this place to acknowledge the work over many decades performed by many, many colleagues in the field on which we had to rely to compile this information, some of whom I see in this very room. The scope of topics we cover in this report is broad, so the only possibility I have here in the about 10 given minutes is to give you a short overview, and I would like to do this to shortly or to closely follow the structure of the report to give you really an idea of how it is organized. So the part 1 covers the period up to 1945. Of course, the Nazi period, but also a few sections dedicated to the time before. And the first of these subsections is Germany before 1933, the situation of the medical profession. Now, physicians, and this is known by many of you or all of you, physicians joined the Nazi Party in greater numbers, in a greater proportion than any other profession. This is something that certainly demands an answer. Many have been given in the literature. What we do here is we focus on the history from the end of the First World War, roughly until the beginning of the Nazi period, to try to find answers in terms of the social, political, and economic situation of the profession. Systematic exclusion and persecution of Jewish health professionals. As soon as the Nazis came into power, and this is true both for Germany in 1933 and 5 years later in Austria, Jewish physicians and other health workers were persecuted, expelled from their professions. We have already heard an example of this, and forced into exile, forced to flee. And it was in Berlin and in Vienna that this persecution took on its most radical forms, also for the reasons of the importance of the Jewish medical profession in both cities. Nazi ideology, the unique role of medicine and of the life sciences within the Nazi regime cannot be understood without an analysis of the specific features of the Nazi worldview and its central and elementary biomedical elements. Eugenics and medical genetics. Eugenics provided the basis for the regime's agenda of so-called racial hygiene. These are also elements with a distinct international dimension. And this means that in many parts of the world, in many countries of the world, there were eugenic movements that existed at the time, which is also an important element of understanding this history. Forced sterilizations and abortions. During the time of the Third Reich, more than 300,000 people were forcibly sterilized because they were considered to be genetically unfit. And this massive campaign, this is also an important element to bear in mind, this massive campaign involved a huge number of health professionals and other also public health administrators and others to cooperate in this endeavor and to make it possible. The public health system in the service of the Volk, a term we often had to leave untranslated for its very specific connotations in this context. As we explain, the whole public health system in Nazi Germany including Austria, was transformed into an instrument for the implementation of so-called race hygiene, the vision of a genetically pure, genetically clean, and racially pure German polity or German people. The Nazification of medical education and the health professions, a topic that is of particular importance, of course, for medical universities and institutions of medical learning more broadly. Professional organizations, some of which are represented here today, healthcare institutions and universities were permeated with Nazi ideology, including a very specific version of medical ethics that was aligned with the Nazi ideology in broader terms. Medicalized mass murder. A core topic of the report is the extermination of at least 230,000 people with disabilities, psychiatric illnesses, or other conditions under a number of distinct campaigns, which are still often referred to, especially in the German language, by the euphemistic term that the Nazis themselves preferred, euthanasia, something that gave us considerable headaches in the editing process also, because we had to think hard what is really the appropriate terminology in this context, the Lancet not allowing us the easy way out using scare quotes, basically. There are no scare quotes in the report, something very unusual, I think, to someone who's used to read German texts about the Nazi period. Coercive research is another core aspect of our commission, forced human subject research. It was carried out in concentration camps, that is well known to many, of course, but also in many other contexts that deserve mentioning. And many have heard the name of Josef Mengele, who is also linked to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, whose former building we visited today in the morning. But this was a much broader phenomenon that involved tens of thousands of victims. Medicine and the exploitation of forced laborers. Before and especially during the war, this culminated during the war, more than 20 million people were forced into forced labor under the Nazi regime. This included medical contexts. You also find forced labor in universities, medical schools, hospitals, and of course there's a medical dimension to putting 20 million people, many of them in camps, and forcing them into work. This is a topic that has been for a long time under-researched, clearly, and this is also why we decided, although there was some debate, but we kept, and I'm very happy we did, we kept a specific section on this. Persecuted and murdered health professionals. In every single country that the Germans occupied, or the German army occupied, Jewish health professionals fell victim to persecution, deportation, and murder. And this is something that takes a big portion of the report because it's so important. Linked to this, the next section, medical activity in the ghettos. The ghettos created by the Nazi regime all over Europe were places of immense suffering. But this is also a section where we find examples of resilience and resistance by Jewish health professionals who did their utmost under the most unimaginable conditions to assist their patients and to save lives wherever possible. Medicine in concentration and extermination camps. The purpose of the camps was exploitation and extermination. But there were also medical facilities controlled by the SS, including to perform forced medical experiments. And with this, I would like to transition to the second part of the historical evidence section. This deals with the aftermath of what happened, so with the immediate consequences of Nazi medicine, starting with liberation, starting with 1945, but also with the consequences of this history up to this day. So the first section in this part is called Early Post-Liberation Reactions. The title speaks for itself. How did the world react to these incredible revelations about Nazi medical atrocities? prosecution of medical crimes in Nuremberg and other places, I have to add. So one of these reactions was the attempt to bring perpetrators to justice. And the most important of these endeavors, the most important of these trials was, of course, the Nuremberg doctors' trial held in 1946. Post-war debates on medical ethics, bioethics, and the Nuremberg Code. Another response to these revelations were attempts to establish binding rules, internationally binding rules and norms for medical research on human subjects. There's not a direct causal link, but there are many clearly distinguishable links from these post-war debates, from the trials that happened to this broad movement to establish binding norms. And the link between them, the most important of these, is of course the Nuremberg Code. Health effects of Nazi persecution. Survivors often suffered, and this is something that was often not acknowledged for a very long time, suffered and continue to suffer from the consequences of persecution. And this has important implications that we try to trace both for medical knowledge. Some of medical knowledge we have today was gained in caring for these survivors, for these victims, and it had also important consequences for the medical care of survivors. A section on medical knowledge gained in unethical contexts. Such knowledge was gained from coerced research, of course, but also from the use of the bodies of Nazi victims. And some of this knowledge gained, be it in the context of the Max Planck or Kaiser Wilhelm Society, then Max Planck Society, be it in the context of the Perrenkopf Atlas, which is now relatively well known. But of course, there are many other examples. Some of this knowledge is still today part of the medical canon, and we do think that this is something important to acknowledge and to think about. And this brings me to the last, but certainly the most important point, with the title, the German medical establishment. I almost skipped it, but I shouldn't. The German medical establishment after 1945. The short message is that medical institutions in Germany and in Austria for a very long time did what they could to avoid confronting their pasts. I think this echoes something that has been said before today, and is also today broadly acknowledged, and something that has fundamentally changed. And this also meant a heavy burden for the victims. The victims for over decades were not acknowledged, not in their suffering, not in their entitlement to be seen as victims. And this brings me to really the last point, and the most important, which I already let slip, from silence to commemoration, recognition of victims. As we lay out in the report, identifying and recognizing the victims as individuals took a very long time to develop, and it is an ongoing obligation. And this is also one of the key recommendations. Miriam Sabin has mentioned before that one important function of such a report, and of all the commissions actually, is to give specific recommendations that can also be verified if there's a specific outcome. So I take one of our key recommendations here, which is also with what I will conclude my short presentation, and I quote from the report, a little bit shortened. Victims should be identified and memorialized as individuals. Further investigations are needed to continue identifying the victims of Nazi medical crimes and to reconstruct their individual biographies. And with this I close, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
We continue with our second portion of our report, and that is called The Implications for Today, and they will be presented by Sabine Hildebrandt, another co-chair of our commission, but not only that, she is also the correspondent author of our report. And what that means, my mailbox is a witness for. It's unbelievable numbers of emails and so on. So please, Sabine.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Sachse. Okay. So after hearing about the historical evidence that our Commission believes needs to be known by all health professionals, I will present what we identified as the implications of this history for today. This is our Commission at work during one of the 100 and so meetings of the last 3 years. One of the few meetings actually where we were able to meet in person here in Jerusalem. At the time, we had gathered the basic historical evidence that we had decided to include in our report and began thinking together what the implications of this history are for medicine and the health professions today. Our brainstorming occurred in one of the now routine hybrid meetings around the globe and around the clock. This is a result of our deliberations, and this is the short list. The original list had more than 120 items that we looked at, and what clearly emerges just here from this multitude is that the history of medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust is relevant for every field of medicine and healthcare. It is relevant to today's perceptions of and debates in the health professions and the public. We were able to, okay, this clicker and I are on a warpath. We were able to formulate a core of 5 key implications from the multitude, implications that we contend are relevant for health professionals everywhere. The central insight from this history is that the atrocities that health professionals committed during the Nazi reign and the Holocaust represent, to a large extent, to the outcome of a corrupt moral agency in the face of potential dangers inherent to modern scientific medicine as it emerged in the 19th century. While medicine holds immense potentials to benefit humanity, it can also cause harm. And this is true at all times. However, it took the specific political conditions of Nazi Germany to transform these potential dangers into the particularly radical manifestation we document in this commission. The moral agency of health professionals became distorted through opportunities and temptations offered by the Nazi regime. Recognizing this potential within medicine and its practitioners through interactions with states, employers, or other authorities is important to understand one's own agency. In this context, preventive steps must be taken to counteract an ever-present risk of medical injustices or infringement of fundamental human rights. Our report discusses some of the specific risks linked to such factors as opportunities to abuse medical power, the tendency to objectify patients and research participants, dilemmas about split loyalties, and temptations to abandon basic values for ideological and opportunistic reasons. The core values and ethics of healthcare are fragile and need to be protected. They require constant critical assessment and reinforcement. Health professionals in Nazism were not without ideas of their professional duties of medical ethics. They developed a specific form of ethics that put the health of the German people above all those considered to be outsiders, thus excluding vast numbers of individuals from their care. This exclusion followed eugenic, anti-Semitic, racist, and other discriminatory criteria and supported Nazi policies. Few health professionals did not question this distortion of their ethical duties towards the human beings in their care. This history provides a unique possibility to explore the aims and limits of professional ethics and how they change over time dependent on cultural, social, economic, and political factors, particularly when put under pressure. Therefore, professional ethics in healthcare constantly need to be critically assessed and reaffirmed to ensure that they stay aligned with core values specific to medicine and to avoid becoming exclusionary and inhumane. Courage, resistance, and resilience are necessary to prevent and counteract potential abuses of trust, power, and authority in healthcare. Extreme forms of misconduct and abuse of power can be studied and analyzed in the well-documented context of medical involvement in Nazism and the Holocaust. At the same time, this history provides remarkable examples of physicians and other healthcare professionals' resilience in the face of challenges and resistance to temptations, pressure, and coercion. These included refusal to follow the requirements formulated by the eugenic sterilization law and refusal to cooperate with the genocidal patient murder programs. Even more remarkable is the broad range of resistant efforts of Jewish and other persecuted health professionals, particularly the struggles of physicians, midwives, and nurses to provide medical care in the ghettos and concentration camps. These examples show that such courage, resistance, and resilience is not only necessary but possible. Health professional practice and the pursuit of scientific knowledge should always occur within a framework that prioritizes individual human rights. The physicians and medical scientists who performed coerced human experiments during the Nazi era often followed the scientific rationale of knowledge gain. They believed that scientific validity was their only obligation concerning professional ethics. They did not consider the extreme cruelty of their methods and unbearable suffering of their victims, and certainly did not prioritize these individuals' human rights. However, protecting and respecting human rights are primary obligations for health professionals, including those working to enhance scientific knowledge in medicine. Only under conditions of informed consent is the pursuit of knowledge through research on humans justified, based on the respect for dignity, autonomy, and equality of every individual human being. And finally, and more relevant than ever, health professionals have particular responsibilities in fighting against anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of discrimination. They have distinct credibility to challenge false scientific claims made by anti-Semites, racists, sexists, and other bigots, and they are in key positions to prevent, detect, document, or remedy human rights violations such as torture and mistreatment in detention settings. This is true not only in the practice of healthcare, but also in education and research settings. Further, health professionals can act in the political sphere because it is especially necessary to sustain the provision of appropriate care to vulnerable populations, historically marginalized groups, and those in regions affected by war or conflict, thereby counteracting human rights violations that may even include crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. We health professionals know that there is no factual basis for claims that human beings are fundamentally different or of different value. Rather, we know through our education and daily practice that we all share the same human body in all its variations, the same human spirit in all its variations, and the same human rights. We all own dignity and deserve respect. It is our responsibility to practice, stand up for, and proclaim our shared humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine. And now we continue with the third part of our presentation that will be presented to you by Shmuel Rice. You already know him. I only want to say that he is a family physician with more than 4 decades experience in acting as a family physician, but also in acting as a medical educator. And of course, you're the best person to present what can be done after our report is there. So.
Thank you so much, Carola, for this kind introduction. Now that my esteemed co-chairs have presented the history and the implications, we can try to delineate the resulting education. So what were the medical education goals of the report? To develop educational approaches that promote ethical conduct, moral development, and formation of a professional identity. I will speak more about this construct. Based on compassion, through educational medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust. Why? Because learning and reflecting upon this history support the formation of morally courageous and resilient professionals, ideally equipped with greater capacity to confront current and future challenges, as well as a professional community with greater capacity to shape and support this across all its members. We have identified 3 medical education paradigms that were of best fit to support our research. The first, in its most old and developed form, is the competency-based medical education framework. Here in its Canadian CanMed version, you see these 6 petal-like competencies that converge together to create the medical expert. And the competencies derive from an analysis of societal and patient needs. The second paradigm is the informative, formative, transformative paradigm. The CBME is about informative level. This is actually a construct that was launched into mainstream medical education in 2010, so the Lancet Commission on Medical Education. It borrows from Robert Keegan from Harvard in general education, and it actually postulates that the most important aim of medical education is to create transformed practitioners who are enlightened change agents, and that hopefully they will operate within a transformed healthcare system. Informative learning is about knowledge and skills and creates experts, like we already said. The formative level is about socialization and integration of values to form professionals. And transformative learning is what I said about enlightened change agents and leaders in our system. The third construct is professional identity formation. I don't have time to go more into it, but actually after using these 3 constructs in our analysis, we came up with a new paradigm that we call history-informed professional identity formation, which is the use of knowledge, use the knowledge of and reflection on the history of the profession to build moral agency among professionals, thereby enhancing capacity to serve as stewards of their shared professional values. And it's the core of history-informed professional identity formation is critical reflection on what professional values and priorities ought to be, never blindly accepting existing professional structures and culture or propose changes to this, but to critically scrutinize them, examine their origin, assess their alignment between one's personal values and those of the profession, and examine both for areas of weakness. All these constructs together, in our view, are about the moral education of the health professional. Now, I'm not talking about a course in ethics, necessary but insufficient. We are talking about constructs such as moving from moral sensitivity to moral behavior. We are talking about, as we already said, how to speak about moral courage. And we would like also to point out that there is a ubiquity of moral distress in clinical life, which means when a practitioner has to act in conflict with his own morality, this has become very prevalent, and we became conscious of it very much so through the pandemic. Once moral distress is prevalent, the practitioners can also suffer moral injury, which actually wounds the practitioner and can lead to burnout. And research shows that one of the major drivers of dehumanization is burnout. This is why the moral education of the health practitioner is so much more than, as I said, just a course in ethics. Okay, enough of theory. How do we operationalize all this fine theory? In the report, you will find a roadmap for curriculum development, which is also supported by the report appendix, which is not in your booklet, but it's online. The roadmap is a method of designing curricula, which also speaks about content, pedagogies, assessment, and faculty development. And the primer of medical education is going one step further into this roadmap. For example, in the report, in panels 25 and 26, you have two examples of curriculum that has been administered by commission members, and in the appendix, they are mapped to the competencies of CANMED. So it's a practical way on how to approach education about medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust. Besides the primer on medical education, in the appendix, there are additional 18 or so case histories. Now 18 is the curricula. So there is a number of additional case history that also are very prevalent in the report itself. Actually, there are about 40 panels which are case studies that can immediately become the basis of the historical evidence for any educational intervention that we want to design. And then there is a roster of 18 exemplar syllabi that we have identified around the world. We just received the first amendment of one of them after Thursday. One of the teachers said, no, there is a newer version of my syllabus, and we are going to update it. And finally, there is a glossary of German terms. If you look at it graphically, you can see that you move from the, like our commission's aims, you move from the core historical knowledge to the implications you wish to convey in your teaching, and then you go through the practical considerations of content, the course length, the course audience, and then how it fits with the general curriculum, and then choosing a level from informative to transformative, and choosing the depth of your teaching from basic to advanced. Finally, we have 11 recommendations. I'm going to read them one by one. No, don't worry. I'll start only by 3 of them as examples. For example, use the history of medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust to emphasize the unique opportunities and responsibilities of health professionals in the elimination of anti-Semitism and racism, like Sabine mentioned before. Or create experiential learning, number 8, opportunities including visits to historical sites and museums when possible, and historical case studies that represent real-life approaches to learning. And 9, use reflective exercises to consolidate informative and formative learning, and to create opportunities for transformative learning. This all can actually culminate in 3 educational outcomes, in our view. At the end of the educational intervention, the learner will recognize the potential for abuse of power inherent in healthcare and actively seek to prevent it for oneself. Demonstrate moral agency and courage, speaking up when necessary. And finally, incorporate prevention of crimes against humanity and genocide to her ethos and competencies. To finalize, I'm very happy to report to you that as the Commission was doing its work in progress, educational interventions already began to be implemented. And it's a very strong validation of our work, such as there was a marked increase in reflective work within educational visits to relevant sites, such as Hedy Wald's work with her colleague who is sitting next to her. We actually, Friday, the morning after we launched the report in Vienna, started the faculty development course, 15 fellows from all around the world until Monday morning. We had the Teach the Teachers course, 15 prospective teachers of medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust. I think we did a reasonable job. It will continue for a year with Zoom meetings and then culminate in another workshop of 3 days. And we will probably repeat this with newer cohorts. I'm very pleased to report to you that, Emma, can you stand up, please? There is a course already created and will be launched within the next few weeks, online on medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust for the African context. Thank you very much. And last but not least, in Jerusalem, we are in the last stages of transforming our Hebrew-based MOOC, Massive Open Online Course on Medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust, into English, and it will be made available in the next academic year. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I forgot something, but we can drop it.
Thank you very much, Shmuel Rice, for this presentation. We will now move to the next part of our afternoon, and we will hear statements by survivors and representatives of the victims of medical crimes in Nazi times. So we will first hear actually see a video that Shmuel Rice and colleagues actually recently created in conversation with Yona Laks, who is a survivor of Mengeles experiments. She lives in Israel, and she speaks to hear us again after 20 years, when she first came here for the symposium of the Max Planck Society. And so we will hear now from Yona Laks directly. She cannot be with us in person because, of course, she is frail by now. Thank you.
My name is Yona Laks. I live in Tel Aviv. "20 days after, there was instruction to leave, they get all the Jews are to leave their houses, including all their belongings, and move to the certain section of the old town of Lodz, and obviously leave everything behind." Came a rumor, actually, that the children are going to be brought to be killed. my father found out about it at night. He crawled into the children's camp and drew us out of the camp into the ghetto, to the main place. And yes, next morning, all the children population has been brought to extermination camps and killed. In 1944, the Lodz ghetto was liquidated and all the population was sent to Auschwitz. Arriving to Auschwitz, on the rampa, where Mengele performed the selection, came out that my twin was sent to the Rechts, which means into the camp, whereas I was sent to the crematorium. My elder sister, Hannah, she shouted out, "Please leave the two together, because they are twins and have never before been departed." And when Mengele heard about it, he sent an SS officer to run along and bring me back from the march to the crematorium. And so I got to Mengele, to Dr. Mengele, and the experiments. The experiments were cruel, painful, frightful, against any way of dignity or anything. Much blood was extracted. X-rays, yes. We used to sit for 10 hours on benches, naked, and they used to point out about the differences between the twins. Also, exchange of blood from twin to twin and to other twins, to others. It was cruel. It was bad. We were not permitted to cry. And we definitely were not permitted to ask. And therefore, I'm sure up to date, the world does not know yet exactly what they injected us, and so forth. If I may summarize, and it can't be summarized, and I haven't seen all I haven't said. I didn't say everything I had to say, but I must say that obviously the experiments performed on healthy people is cruel. This cannot be just pass away and not spoken about it and not deriving to conclusions. And then I'm glad to say that eventually there is a group of people who took it that far and do want to change things with the points of teaching new medical students from all the ranges to learn and to hear about the things that have been done.
Many thanks to Jona Lux for this presentation. I think we should give her an applause. Thank you. And we will now hear from Margaret Hamm. Margaret Hamm, it's my great pleasure to introduce you. She is a representative of the Society of Relatives of the so-called euthanasia victims and victims of forced sterilization, and she has served in this organization since the 1980s. She is a graduate teacher in German language and history, and she was awarded the Bundesverdienstkreuz, a high honor of the German government, which, however, she rejected. And Frau Hamm will speak to us in German, but you have a translation on your seat or online. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Das Statement spreche ich in Deutsch und ich bitte das zu entschuldigen. Der Bund der Euthanasiegeschädigten und Zwangssterilisierten, BEZ, begrüßt die Forschungen der Kommission. Meine Gedanken zu den Forschungsergebnissen speisen sich durch den Kontakt mit den Opfern und ihren Lebensberichten. Die eugenische Bewegung seit der Industrialisierung im 19. Jahrhundert und im Nationalsozialismus die Rassenhygiene mit ihren Vertretern und Handelnden aus Politik und medizinischen Berufen brachte den Verfolgten Verletzungen und Tod. Die ideologische Ausrichtung auf die germanische, in Klammern arische Mythologie und das Lebensrecht nur der Starken und Gesunden schuf in der Bevölkerung die Akzeptanz zur Selektion in der medizinischen Versorgung und in der Gesellschaft. Die Zwangssterilisierten und die zur Ermordung Selektierten waren den medizinischen Versuchen durch die Täter aus Politik, Gesellschaft und den Ärzten ausgeliefert. Aus Berichten Betroffener und ihrer Familien wissen wir zum Beispiel von Einschränkungen bei der Berufswahl und Heirat, Forschungen und Experimente zu verschiedenen Krankheiten, oft unterstellten Krankheiten, bis hin zur Tötung der Menschen, um an ihre Organe für die Forschung zu gelangen. Die durch die Zwangssterilisation herbeigeführten physischen und psychischen Verletzungen blieben den Menschen oftmals bis zu ihrem Tod. In ihren lebensgeschichtlichen Berichten erzählen sie es uns immer wieder. Durch ihre gesellschaftliche und entschädigungspolitische Ausgrenzung in der Bundesrepublik hatten sie kaum eine Möglichkeit, medizinische Behandlungen für das Erlittene zu erhalten, zumal oftmals die ehemaligen NS-Mediziner weiterhin als Ärzte tätig waren. Der BEZ forderte immer eine Entschädigung für diese Opfergruppe, die eine gesundheitliche Versorgung und Betreuung einschloss, leider ohne Erfolg. Wir forderten es, weil die meisten der von uns vertretenen Opfer durch den im Nationalsozialismus vorgezeichneten Lebensweg dadurch traumatisiert und auch arm waren. Die gesundheitliche Versorgung heute ist glücklicherweise eine andere, obwohl sie in einigen Bereichen auf den Forschungen und Experimenten der Nazis aufgebaut hat. Aus dieser Erfahrung heraus muss auch bei Forschungen, die es heute an Menschen gibt, verpflichtend sein, diese kritisch zu hinterfragen. Die Probanden müssen ihr Einverständnis geben. Es gibt aber auch immer wieder Aussagen, wo das nicht geschah. Ich erinnere mich an Berichte aus sogenannten Entwicklungsländern, wo eine deutsche Pharmafirma medizinische Forschungen an Frauen vorgenommen und sie ohne ihr Wissen und Einverständnis sterilisiert hat. Wenn wir an die Forschung im Nationalsozialismus denken und auf die Selektion und die oftmals auf Denunziationen beruhenden Verfolgungen, kommen uns Gedanken zu Entwicklungen, wie sie heute in unverdächtiger neuer Sprache als Fortschritt zu beobachten sind. Zum Beispiel aus Eugenik wurde nach 1945 die Humangenetik genannt. Gemeint sind die Entscheidungen am Lebensanfang, ob ein behindertes Kind leben darf oder nicht, und die von Gesetzen begleitenden Entwicklungen am Lebensende, wenn ein Menschenleben in Klammern möglicherweise zu beenden ist. Diese Vorstellungen sind für die Opfer der Zwangssterilisation und für die Angehörigen der Ermordeten unerträglich und erinnern stark an die Gesundheitspolitik im Nationalsozialismus. Die Die Gesundheitsvorsorge heute müsste für alle Kranken gleich sein und es dürfte keine Versorgung durch eine Zweiklassenmedizin geben. Denn alle Menschen, auch diejenigen, die die NS-Zeit überlebten, haben ein Recht, bestmöglich versorgt zu werden. Aus Sicht des BEZ wäre es für die Opfer der Zwangssterilisation und die Angehörigen der Euthanasieopfer wünschenswert, außerhalb der Wissenschaft, in der Gesellschaft ethische und moralische Themen zu diskutieren, um zukünftige menschenwürdige Entscheidungen in der medizinischen Versorgung festzuschreiben. Ich danke Ihnen.
Thank you so much, Frau Hamm. And now I would like to ask Hartmut Traub to speak for his uncle, Benjamin Traub, who his uncle Benjamin Traub was a victim of patient murder program Aktion T4 in Hadamar. And Hartmut Traub has a doctorate in philosophy. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Much. It's a great honor for me to speak to you about my uncle and about the research I did on his life. I'm a nephew of Benjamin Traub, and this morning I had the idea to title my speech From a Spectator to a Native or Inhabitant of History. I'm a nephew of Benjamin Traub. Benjamin was my father's youngest brother. During the T4 campaign, Benjamin was killed on the 13th of March 1941. He was 26 years old. Along with 63 other people, he died in the gas chamber of the Hadamar killing center and burned there. In Hadamar hospital alone, more than 10,000 people were killed in the gas chamber between January and August 1941. Benjamin was a gifted child. He played chess, piano, and violin. He wanted to be a musician. From the age of 15, he suffered from a mental disorder which was then diagnosed as juvenile schizophrenia. In contrast to my father's war experiences in Russia and the evacuation of my family in 1942, my family had no stronger interest in Benjamin's fate and the circumstances of his death. This also applied to me until 2009. That year, I was commissioned to write a short biography about my uncle. The reason for this was the laying of a Stolperstein, a stumble stone, a small commemorative plate in my hometown for a victim of Nazi euthanasia. I researched my uncle's life and suffering for 2 years. And this inquiry changed my life from a spectator to an inhabitant of history. During the research, I made 3 shocking experiences I want to mention here because they are also relevant for us today. The first shocking experience was to realize how easily politics and the media can succeed in manipulating large parts of the population through propaganda and brainwashing. And this in such a way that the society was prepared and willing to exclude certain population groups, to declare them to be unworthy lives, to be senseless ballast existences, to be wasted time and wasted money, to deny them the right to live, to degrade them into useless objects, and ultimately to kill them en masse. In our days, in social sciences, this is called group-specific misanthropy. The second shock was that this propaganda and brainwashing was successful not only among the easily influenced population, but even in well-educated circles of society, including the staff of the so-called healthcare system. In this system were neither forcibly recruited capos working, nor soldiers, nor SS, but rather there were educated and mostly well-trained staff, doctors and nurses who did their jobs. Horrible mass murderers day by day. The mistreatment and killing of the wards of sick and needy people was and remains a shocking perversion of medical professional ethics without comparison. The third horror that struck me was to realize how quickly Germany could forget and promote NS mass murderers back into good professional or political positions, even to give them the opportunity as so-called experts in reparation committees to decide on the applications of their former victims, with the well-known results. The refusal of appropriate compensation for euthanasia victims and the rejection of including the Nazi euthanasia victims in the scope of the Federal Compensation Act to this day. So, what is my demand and wish from politics and society as a teacher of social sciences and philosophy? To the address of politics, do not stop supporting political education, as the German government now plans it. Please expand this field of education, because this field is at least as important as mathematics, German, technology, or digitalization. It is as elementary for a democratic system and a democratic society, for humanization and critical but social tolerance in the fields of discussions and conflicts. To the address of school and education, stop brutalization in language. Let especially young people learn ethics and respect by research of biographies of victims of the Nazi regime. Good chances offer research and caretaking of stumble stones, of Stolpersteine. Let pupils and students follow the way of former neighbors, women and men, boys and girls, grandparents and babies to their dying days in camps or so-called hospitals. Let them follow the path of mistreating or execution of former neighbors in the cellars of the Gestapo or elsewhere. Let them learn authentically and personally where discrimination can lead. Let them take care of a stumble stone. Let them polish it every month. Let them stumble into history and learn from it for their own present life. Because biography, identification, and personalization is a good, maybe the only way and the only key to empathy. Let them change their lives from spectators to empathic inhabitants of a humanic history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hartmut Traub, for being here as a strong witness for your uncle, Benjamin Traub. We now move forward to the invited statements by representatives of medical associations and institutions. We had asked them to answer 2 questions. What do you see as the implications of this history for today and tomorrow? And what is the commitment of your institution? At this point, do we have Professor Jesse Ehrenfeld online?
I am here, yes.
Oh, that is wonderful. Thank you so much for being here with us. Professor Ehrenfeld was inaugurated as president of the American Medical Association in June 2023. He is a senior associate dean, tenured professor of anesthesiology and director of the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment at the Medical College of Wisconsin. He was elected the American Medical Association Board of Trustees in 2014. Thank you so much for being here with us, Professor Ehrenfeld.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for this. Thank you for this kind invitation to share some remarks on behalf of the American Medical Association to commemorate the release of the Commission's groundbreaking report on medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust. I will say that this report is more important today than perhaps ever before, given the acute and painful rise of anti-Semitism worldwide. I'm Dr. Jesse Ehrenfeld. I'm president of the American Medical Association. I'm an anesthesiologist in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I am also a Jew. And scores of my relatives were murdered in the Holocaust. My Aunt Dorothy Krauscher-Finger survived a forced labor camp after her parents were murdered, ultimately escaped, and told me a story when I was a young child when I asked her about the tattoo I saw on her arm of having to dive into a frozen lake to avoid being shot. 80 years after the fall of Nazism and the triumph of the Allied forces in World War II, the horrors of the Nazi regime are still coming to light. Much has been said and studied over the years about the Nazis' chilling worldview of a master race and the steps it took to achieve it through the systemic and widespread eradication of those they labeled as genetically inferior: Jews, people with mental, cognitive, or other disabilities, and many others. Less well known, but made painfully clear in a meticulously researched report by this commission, is the role that so many physicians and medical professionals willingly played in this racist agenda, and how their actions contributed greatly to the terrors unleashed on the people of Europe and the world during the Nazi period. Eugenics, forced sterilization, reproductive care entirely controlled by the state, heinous medical experiments on prisoners, state-sanctioned genocide, and mass murder. These and other atrocities committed by the Nazis are only possible when you see some humans as less than others, when you identify certain groups of people as lives unworthy of living, as unfit for reproduction, as racially inferior, or worst of all, as a biological threat to the Volk. That's what creates the possibility of treating other humans as pathogens to be killed in service to the state. As the Commission points out, the idea that every human being is valuable, that one person's life is valued as any other's, is at the very heart of our health professional ethics. It is the basis for the creation of the American Medical Association Code of Medical Ethics nearly a century before the rise of Nazism, the moral and ethical standards that still guide medical practice today. Sadly, as we all know too well, physicians around the world have, in dark periods throughout history, failed to live up to the high moral and ethical standards of our profession. The United States, in particular, has a long and ugly history when it comes to race and gender inequities, medical exploitation and experimentation, racism and discrimination, segregated and unequal access to healthcare, and other hardships that significantly contribute to wide gaps in health outcomes for Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, LGBTQ, and other historically marginalized communities. Inequities that persist today. Most of us in medicine have heard of the horrors of the Tuskegee syphilis study, and we know the name Henrietta Lacks. But for every story and every name we know, there are likely thousands of unconscionable examples of medical experimentation deeply rooted in racism and hate. The American Medical Association has in recent years been on an important journey of publicly uncovering and confronting our own history of racism and discrimination that has contributed to the American healthcare system we have today, a system plagued by inequities and injustices that have harmed patients and systematically excluded many from our physician ranks, including Jews. The AMA understands there is much to learn in exploring the painful truths and examining past actions in the context of today. Aspiring physicians and professionals at every stage of their career benefit greatly from a deeper understanding of the cultural and political forces that contributed to the reprehensible acts of moral abandonment to serve a racist ideology or atrocities committed under the guise of scientific advancement. The AMA has begun this difficult work not by only recognizing our past moral failings and speaking openly about them, but also by advancing policies that seek to correct past wrongs, that influence social determinants of health, that generate inequities today, and by educating physicians on why this work is necessary and long overdue. Last year, responding to a groundswell of support from physicians across the US and every corner of the country, the AMA appointed a Truth, Reconciliation, Transformation, and Healing Task Force to explore AMA's past discriminatory actions in greater detail, so we can learn from them, take purposeful steps to not repeat them, and truly fulfill our ethical responsibility of treating all people, all patients, as equals in our healthcare system. We're not there yet. There is much difficult and painful work ahead, but this work is so critically important to foster greater awareness and understanding among physicians and future physicians about the sanctity of universal human rights, to uphold the high standards of our profession, and to remind one another always of the value inherent in each person's life and of our most solemn duty to care for them in their time of need. Thank you for the invitation to present today.
Thank you so much, Professor Erdenfeld. And we will now hear from Professor Zion Haggai, Chairman of the Israeli Medical Association since 2018. He is a trained gynecology and obstetrician. So we will hear from him now.
Good afternoon from Tel Aviv, Israel. My friend, we are here today to remember the horrors of the Holocaust and their impact on us today. I would like first to thank the important contribution of the Lancet Commission on Medicine and the Holocaust in searching the past to identify lessons for the future. I would like to thank the co-host, Charité Institute for the History and Ethics of Medicine, the Max Planck Society and Robert Koch Institute, to Professor Herwig Czech and Dr. Sabine Hildebra, Professor Shmuel Reis and Professor Volke Rolek, Professor Carola Sachs, who organized this important event. The Holocaust took place 8 years ago and lasted for 12 years, and yet its impact continues to reverberate today. Among the innumerable horrors of the Holocaust, medicine itself was a victim. Physicians went from being angels of hope to bearers of torture and death. Most experiments conducted during this time had little scientific value, but what about those that did produce useful, valid findings? What should be our moral and professional stance? The case of Penkoff Atlas is an excellent example. It is an anatomical atlas prepared by Dr. Edward Penkoff based on the bodies of Nazi victims. The book is known for its accuracy and detail and is still used today. In a unique example of the moral complexity involved, the atlas was used a few years ago by an Israeli Arab surgeon to operate on the crushed leg of an Israeli man who had been injured by a landmine as a child. A medical ethics expert in Israel contends that the use of valuable information, such as found in the Pernkopf Atlas, can be justified, but firmly opposes giving credit to the authors. Whatever one's position, the use of Nazi medical knowledge by an Arab doctor to operate on a Jewish patient in Israel is an amazing story, tying together the past and the future. The contribution of physician Holocaust survivors to modern medicine in Israel from the end of the Second World War and until the end of 1972, there were 1,350 physician immigrants to Israel, most of them Holocaust survivors. By the end of 1952, Holocaust survivors comprised 1/3 of Israeli doctors. Their integration into medical workforce was quick and successful and contributed both to public health in Israel in the first years of the state, as well as to their own rehabilitation from the horrors of the Holocaust. Unfortunately, the horrors of the Holocaust are not just a thing of the past. 1 month ago, on October 7, 2023, the greatest tragedy since the Holocaust befell the Jewish people when thousands of Hamas terrorists invaded our town in Israel and massacred 1,400 civilians and soldiers, raping, torturing, burning alive, and mutilating men, women, children, and the elderly, and taking about 240 hostages back to Gaza. Among their victims were citizens of different countries and even Palestinians.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, dear Professor Sachse, Professor Hildebrand, Professor Czech, Professor Reis, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues. Medicine and the biomedical sciences during the Nazi period and the Holocaust. What do you see as the implications for today and tomorrow? What is the commitment of your institution? First, I would like to begin by saying that it's a great challenge to adequately answer these questions in under 10 minutes. That is why it is vital and important that historians, physicians, and other experts have gathered here today to address these questions from different perspectives. Only together we can draw effective conclusions. Ladies and gentlemen, it's profoundly appalling that physicians played an active role in the Shoah and were deeply involved in the inhuman atrocities of the Nazi regime. For far too long, the prevailing narrative was that only an insignificantly small number of physicians were actively involved in these crimes, while an apolitical, silent majority was just trying to survive the 1,000-year Reich. This narrative was false. The truth is that leading representatives of the medical profession, professional medical societies, and university research institutions participated in these crimes. There was a great willingness throughout the medical profession to actively embrace Nazi ideology. Ladies and gentlemen, addressing the causes, extent, and consequences of physicians' involvement in the crimes of the Nazi era is not an end in itself. We owe this work first and foremost to the victims. It is all the more tragic and shocking that most of the perpetrators and their supporters were allowed to remain in their positions in the newly established German states, generally without any resistance. The German Medical Association and the state chambers of physicians were no exception. The so-called Stunde Null or 0 hour did not exist in reality. Following the war, the Nazi past was hardly discussed in the re-established medical organizations at the state level. For example, as part of the denazification process, the chambers were frequently asked to provide statements on former functionaries. The answers often only partly reflected the truth or were very formulaic, usually emphasizing fanatism and the like. Regrettably, the German Medical Association, in its role as the working group of the medical chambers, only developed an awareness of its duty to address the crimes of the Nazi era as a result of the social and societal changes that emerged in the generations that followed. It was not until 1987, at the 19th German Medical Assembly in Karlsruhe, that the German Medical Association's president at that time, Professor Dr. Carsten Villmar, addressed the culpability of the medical profession for the first time. Starting in 1996, the German Medical Assembly began to define its position on the role of the medical profession in the Nazi era. The delegates of the Medical Assembly made it clear that the basic ethical principles of the medical profession must remain intact and free of the prevailing zeitgeist or any form of state interferences. In later years, resolutions were passed by the German Medical Assembly recognizing the victims of euthanasia and forced sterilization as victims of Nazi persecution, addressing forced labor, condemning the National Socialist law for the prevention of offspring with hereditary diseases as unjust and more. In 2012, the 115th German Medical Assembly adopted the Nuremberg Declaration on the role of the medical profession during the Nazis era. The Medical Assembly stated that the human rights violations committed by the medical profession under the Nazis continue to have an impact today and raise questions about physicians' identity, professional conduct, and medical ethics. I'm certain that Dr. Ozahon Enebolele, past president of the World Medical Association, later will also refer on the Declaration of Helsinki and the other core ethical documents of the WMA, which were developed and implemented in the wake of the horrific human experiments carried out under National Socialism. Ladies and gentlemen, admitting guilt, advocating for the right of victims, and upholding a clear commitment to the ethical principles of medical practice are important. Equally important is a comprehensive scholarly review of the past. I would like to highlight Aaron Pfaff's work, The History of the Established Medical Profession in the Region of what is now the federal state of Baden-Württemberg from 1920 to 1960, which was commissioned by the State Chamber of Physicians of Baden-Württemberg. This almost 1,000-page study, which is based on the Denazification Court proceedings or Spruchkammerverfahren, carried out starting in May 1946, reveals that those suspected of supporting National Socialism were not held accountable due to an endless number of false testimonies and embellished character references. Another example is the dissertation of Gisela Tascher in the field of medical history entitled State, Power and the Medical Profession, which focused on the state of Saarland. Her work highlights the respective legal framework for medical practice as well as the role of the professional medical organizations in various political contexts. In 2011, Gisela Tascher was awarded the Herbert Levine Prize for her work on the role of the medical profession under National Socialism. The Federal Ministry of Health, the German Medical Association, and the National Association of Statutory Health Insurance Physicians initiated this award in 2006. The result of this initiative from 2006 to 2021 have been noteworthy. So far, 18 prizes, 6 special prizes, and 3 honorable mentions have been awarded. The German Medical Association has also initiated several of its own projects, such as the research report Medizin und Nationalsozialismus, which was published in 2011. It was compiled by an independent group of experts under the direction of Professor Robert Jütte, who was then director of the Robert Bosch Foundation's Institute for the History of Medicine. Further projects, initiatives, and information can be found on our website. Ladies and gentlemen, in addition to examining this dark chapter of German history from an academic perspective, it's essential to engage in personal exchange with the victims and the descendants in order to create an enduring culture of remembrance. The German Medical Association has maintained a close collaboration with the Israeli Medical Association for many years. The executive boards of both organizations meet regularly for joint consultations, most recently in Dresden in 2022. Over the years, these consultations have developed into genuine friendship. In doing so, we of course don't ignore the past. We discuss what happened with each other, we commemorate together, and we mourn together. And of course, we stand by our Israeli friends in these difficult times, following Hamas' cruel acts of terror against the Jewish people. Ladies and gentlemen, anti-Semitism must have no place in Germany or in any other part of the world. This is why it is important and essential to address the past and to educate people. Many medical organizations are involved in these ongoing and urgently needed work. The state chambers of physicians confront their history and involvement in National Socialism. The institutes for the history and ethics of medicine in our medical schools have also been increasingly researching the role of the medical profession in the Nazi era for many years. And the medical crimes carried under National Socialism and how they were dealt with after 1945 have been integrated as a learning objective in the National Competence-Based Catalogue of Learning Objectives. These learning objectives serve as a template for the lectures offered by the medical faculties. Please allow me at this point to state clearly that the German Medical Association emphatically supports the demands and proposals of the Lancet Commission to integrate the role of medicine and the medical profession in National Socialism into the curricula of the health profession worldwide. We stand beside you as we remember, admonish, and learn. Ladies and gentlemen, the historical process of addressing the role of the medical profession in National Socialism is far from complete, and it cannot be carried out or borne by one organization alone. The efforts of all medical organizations are needed in order to remember, to admonish, to call out perpetrators from their own ranks, and to call attention to misconceived notions of collegiality. Cases in which perpetrators were permitted to retain their positions must not be covered up either. At the same time, history shows us that even a dictatorship, at least limited resistance is possible. This didn't necessarily involve risking one's life, although some physicians did just that at the time. One example is Mohammed Helmi, a physician of Egyptian descent who was living in Berlin at the time. He hit several Jewish people during the Second World War and was therefore posthumously honored at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem as one of the righteous among nations. Helmi displayed exemplary and extraordinary courage. He demonstrated that there is another way. We can also learn from the story like his. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reinhardt. And we now hear from Professor Osahun Enabulele, the immediate past president of the World Medical Association. Professor Enabulele, are you there? And he is, as I said, the immediate past president of the World Medical Association, also former president of the Commonwealth Medical Association and the Nigerian Medical Association, and a chief consultant, family physician, and life member of the World Organization of Family Doctors, and an undergraduate and postgraduate lecturer in family medicine. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I bring you greetings from the World Medical Association. I'd like to recognize the co-chairs of the Lancet Commission on Medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust, as well as all other dignitaries and participants at this very important session. I'm quite delighted to have the unique opportunity to address this distinguished audience today on behalf of the World Medical Association. I wish to extend the warm felicitations and gratitude of the World Medical Association to the co-chairs and organizers of this event for the invitation extended to the World Medical Association to make a statement at this important occasion, marking the launch of the Lancet Commission on Medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust. The World Medical Association welcomes the fact that there is now a report that reveals the extent of the involvement of the medical profession. The new report, presented by 20 scholars, provides a comprehensive overview of the crimes committed in the field of medicine under the Nazi regime. It traces the development of medical research during the Nazi era and portrays individual perpetrators, as well as individual victims and imprisoned physicians who, for example, treated their fellow inmates under the most agonizing conditions, including in concentration camps. The report further illustrates the extent to which carried out during the Nazi era continues to have impact today. So important to continue to sensitize the medical profession to the extent to which findings originate. This report therefore provides an excellent springboard for the work we need to continue to do going forward. The great horror of the Nazi period and the unspeakable involvement of Nazi doctors in the medical atrocities and unethical human experimentation carried out by the Nazis are some of the most extreme and well-documented examples of medical involvement in human rights abuses in history. The WMA recognizes the importance of studying the worst of humanity in order to be able to identify and prevent similar patterns in the present and future, and to promote the highest ethical standards of care in our medical profession. It is in this light that the WMA remains appreciative of the subsequent Nuremberg trials that took place, and which came with it the development of guidelines for ethical research and medical treatments, especially in terms of informed consent. The establishment of the World Medical Association in the year 1947 and the development of the Declaration of Geneva, known as the Physician's Pledge, and other important policy documents of the WMA were largely direct consequences of the war crimes committed by physicians. The goal was to reestablish trust among patients for physicians, as well as strengthen the patient-physician relationship in a way that is more person-centered and recognizes the inalienable rights of the patients. Shortly after the WMA's establishment, the International Code of Medical Ethics was developed to provide more detailed ethical guidelines. Most recently, revised in 2022, the International Code of Medical Ethics continues to serve as a foundation of ethical principles. The development of the code was followed in 1964 by the adoption of the Declaration of Helsinki, which provides ethical guidelines for medical research involving human subjects, and which is currently undergoing a revision. These are probably the most widely used and recognized guidelines for physicians and other healthcare professionals involved in research with human subjects. The Declaration of Helsinki was developed in response to the horrors of human experimentation carried out by Nazi physicians and researchers. It provides a concise set of ethical guidelines for dealing with conflicts that may arise between two key aspects of medical practice and research: the obligation to do no harm and the essential need to ensure the efficacy and safety of medical interventions by testing them on human subjects. All three of these core ethical documents of the World Medical Association are intended to prevent breaches of ethical conduct among physicians in the future. Aside from the above three ethical documents of the WMA, the development of the Declaration of Taipei on ethical considerations regarding health databases and biobanks is another example of how the WMA stays on top of recent developments. The WMA General Assembly also not too long ago adopted the Declaration of Berlin on racism in medicine at its October 2022 General Assembly held in Berlin, Germany. I'm happy to note that despite the reality of the location where these unfortunate crimes and historical medical atrocities were perpetrated, the German Medical Association, one of WMA's constituent members, has demonstrated a huge awareness of the tremendous obligation it has to ensure that the breaches of medical ethics that occurred during the Nazi era are never permitted to happen again. Indeed, along with other constituent members of the WMA, including the American Medical Association and the Israeli Medical Association and many others, the German Medical Association has played important roles in the revisions of all these three core ethical documents, including chairing some of the international working groups tasked with revising these ethical documents of the WMA. I dare say that 76 years after its formation, the World Medical Association is today a very strong global organization with 115 members and a widely acknowledged defender of medical ethics worldwide. The WMA remains committed to these ethical guidelines and ensures they are continuously updated to remain relevant and to accommodate for changes in the research environment medical technologies, and other changes that impact on healthcare delivery and medical practice. The government remains very convinced that the world needs strong ethical guidance, especially in these troubling times of unending conflicts, violence against physicians, and despicable acts by some repressive governments to undermine the fundamental freedoms, professional autonomy, and clinical independence of physicians. The WMA remains irrevocably committed to providing this guidance. And we want to assure of our strong commitment to strengthening our partnership with progressive bodies like the Lancet Commission in the task of expansion and spread of this important historical knowledge and lessons, including its integration in undergraduate and postgraduate medical educational curriculum. Finally, let us state very clearly that we remain very, very sad about the developments in recent times concerning the unnecessary and unjust invasion by Hamas of the Israeli territory. And we feel extremely saddened by this, and we believe that this is one of those acts that demean our humanity. And as we look forward to the launch of the Lancet Commission's report, we want to once again thank the co-chairs and organizers of this event for extending an invitation to the World Medical Association. Be rest assured of the sustained partnership of the World Medical Association as we wish you a very successful launch. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Inabolele. We will now hear once again from Professor Schade, who will tell us about the Robert Koch Institute's thoughts on implications and commitments.
Ladies and gentlemen, we as representatives of research institutions and organizations were asked to reflect about what implications the Nazi period and the history of the Holocaust have for our present and future work. When I look at the Robert Koch Institute, I have to confess that it took a long time, many decades, before the Institute's shameful role during National Socialism has been critically analyzed. Leading scientists of our institute conducted criminal experiments with humans, amongst these Gerhard Rose, who infected humans with malaria and typhus in Buchenwald and Natzweiler. He was a former head of Department for Tropical Medicine and the vice president of our institute. He was sentenced to lifelong prison during the Nürnberger doctors' trials. He is indeed one of the accused on the picture from the Nürnberger trial on the cover of the recently published Lancet report booklet you see here on your places. Other examples of criminal and human scientists are Eugen Hagen. He worked with typhus and influenza in Natzweiler concentration camp, and the former head of the Department for Experimental Cell and Virus Research at our institute, and Klaus Schilling, the predecessor in Gerhard Rose's positions and at the Robert Koch Institute, who conducted inhuman experiments with malaria in Dachau even after his retirement and was sentenced to death during the Dachau main trial. From 2006 to 2008, a group of historians from the Institute for History of Medicine at the Berlin Charité examined the role of the Robert Koch Institute during the Nazi era. The project, initiated and funded by the Robert Koch Institute, was to examine the scientific and political activities of our institute during that area as comprehensively as possible and without any institutional bias. The results were published in a variety of forms, including 2 books. In 2011, after a competition to find a suitable artistic format, a memorial to the events of the Nazi era, visible both from the inside and the outside of our institute, was unveiled in front of the Robert Koch Institute's main building and in its foyer. This was the work of the Berlin artist Heike Ponwitz, entitled Robert Koch Institute with Open Eyes. The artwork, which also bears the name Erinnerungszeichen Remembering, is dedicated to the victims of the vile criminal work undertaken under the guise of research by the Nazis, in which also Robert Koch Institute researchers were involved. That stands as a permanent admonition to all those employed now and in the future at the Robert Koch Institute. The monument is often the first thing visitors see when they arrive at our main site. The memorial also commemorates the 12 Jewish employees and researchers who were forced to leave the Koch Institute in spring 1933. Their names and fates must not be forgotten. That was the intention behind the initiative by our museum team starting in 2011. Their aim was to find out what happened to those employees before, during and after their time at our institute. With monthly episodes of a podcast project, the life stories of those 12 expelled Robert Koch Institute employees were recounted. Intensive research was undertaken and, wherever possible, interviews with their descendants recorded. In the end, a bilingual book in which all biographies are presented in German and English with many photos and documents has been published. I have brought some copies of this book with me today. I think that it is partially important to continually remember the events of the past and the crimes of the National Socialists, especially in the medical field. I'm pleased that our institute has already implemented at least some of the key recommendations contained in the report. But I'm also aware that we should not sit back, because it's especially about the young generation of our societies and young researchers that we have to sensitize. When we look back to history of anti-Semitism over the past 2,000 years, there have always been periods when Jewish people lived integrated and peaceful in their respective countries, followed by areas of harsh discrimination, pogroms, and expulsion. And often, unbelievable inhumanities followed, initial verbal racism and social exclusion. We can't be sure that our society will be sufficiently resistant to prevent the currently growing Israel criticism from turning into widespread, socially accepted anti-Semitism. As human beings and as scientists, we must be vigilant and resolute in our opposition to all forms of incipient racism, anti-Semitism, dehumanization in our daily lives, in our institutes, in our scientific and communities and association, and in society and politics. Remembrance work is never fully done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Schade. And now we will hear from Professor Vierlinger on the Max Planck Society's take on implications on commitments.
Thank you very much again. The Lancet report presents a comprehensive perspective focusing on the healthcare system, the training of physicians and other health professionals, and their self-perception. Now, it might seem that these aspects are not directly relevant to basic research as conducted by the Max Planck Society. However, I strongly believe quite the contrary. For scientific basic research, as we pursue it, mostly non-medical, the moral standards that have emerged from confronting the horrors of the Holocaust are of central, equally central, and maybe even more importance. What insight does the Lancet report offer us? I would like to focus now on 3 points from the report, offering reflections and commentaries to each. The first aspect involves the significance of historical appraisal and research. We continue to feel the repercussions of National Socialism reaching into our present. This becomes especially apparent when relics of that era suddenly and unexpectedly resurface. This includes human specimens from scientific collections, such as brain slices or bones, often originating from victims of the Nazi regime. Sometimes these discoveries come to light during construction projects, as was the case a few years ago, we have heard, here in Berlin, on the grounds of the Free University at the former Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology. Based on what we know today, these findings constituted components of a medical scientific collection from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. Similar discoveries have occurred in various archives and institutes. In 2015, the unearthing of brain slices from the 40s in the archives of the Max Planck Society and the Max Planck Institute for Psychiatry led to the establishment of an independent research group of historians. The majority of these specimens are believed to be linked to victims of the Nazi euthanasia program. Under the leadership of Patricia Heber-Reiss from the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, Herwig Czech, Medical University of Vienna, Paul Weindling, Oxford Brookes University, and Gerrit Hohndorf from the Technical University of Munich, who has since sadly passed away. The findings have been analyzed for the past 5 years. The objective is to trace the origin of the specimens and, where possible, to identify the victims. An initial report, interim report, was published in 2020, with the final report anticipated next year. Alongside the publication, there are proposals for a commemorative book and a monument dedicated to the victims whose remains will receive a dignified burial in consultation with their families. Since the 90s, Max Planck Society has undertaken intensive efforts to comprehensively examine its history. Actually, my script says here, probably true, as one of the first institutions in Germany to do so. I have to admit when I read this, that the 90s, 45 to 55 years after World War II, even if it's one of the first institutions, it's actually shamefully late, I have to confess. Credit goes for those studies to our then President Hubert Markl, who unflinchingly exposed the involvement of the Kaiser Wilhelm Society in National Socialism through an independent commission of historians established in 1997. The project, headed by Reinhard Rurup and Carola Sachse, was completed in 2007. At a symposium, Hubert Markl apologized on behalf of science to surviving victims of medical research. We remain committed to his motto, the disclosure of guilt is the most honest form of apology. This position also forms the foundation for a dynamic culture of remembrance in the Max Planck Society. And this brings me to the second aspect, the Lancet report's emphasis on communication and education. For some time now, our culture of remembrance has also encompassed historical informational offerings. In an organization as globally diverse as the Max Planck Society, many employees have limited knowledge of Germany and its history. And additionally, far too many people in Germany would ideally prefer to view the past, and especially this past, as a closed chapter. For them, such information is particularly important. Through the dissemination of knowledge about science in the Nazi era, we aim to sensitize our researchers to the understanding that respect for human dignity is a universal value that always takes precedence over the acquisition of knowledge, even if a state order, such as National Socialism, contradicted that principle. For several years now, our history has been a significant focus of our internal communication, particularly at the institutes. The MPI for Brain Research in Frankfurt, one of the approximately 20 MPIs with roots dating back to the Kaiser Wilhelm era, serves as a particularly successful example of internal communication. The Institute has not only established a memorial site within its premises, but also organizes an annual ethics lecture within the context of its own history. Here in Berlin, and you have heard about this, on the Dahlem campus, where the first Kaiser Wilhelm Institutes were located and where the Holocaust remains the central conference venue for us, the Max Planck Society offers city tours along with a multimedia guide providing information about our history and also this history in the Third Reich. In the coming years, we plan to expand these offerings. A new focal point will be the exhibition at the Free University about the history of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity and Eugenics at its original site. We have been there this morning. This institute was directly involved in the eugenic measures of the German Nazi state and legitimized the racial ideology of National Socialism through its scientific work. In connection with the victim research project mentioned earlier, the Max Planck Society is planning a memorial and learning center at the MPI for Psychiatry in Munich. Its goal is to educate staff and students about brain research during National Socialism and its transgressions. The awareness of our history must be embedded even more so in our organizational culture. The recent horrific events in the Middle East and the subsequent internal discussions have shown us again how important this is today and in the future. It is particularly important, in my view, to reach young researchers, and not only medical researchers, as I have mentioned before, the next generation. Here, collaboration with universities could be instrumental. Our doctoral programs in the so-called International Max Planck Research Schools and the Max Planck Schools provide an excellent framework for incorporating this topic into the curriculum. As the spokesperson for one of the 3 nationwide Max Planck schools, the Max Planck School of Cognition, which also involves 16 German universities, I assure you that we make this subject a permanent part of our curriculum as suggested by the Lancet Commission. So it will reach medical people and also people beyond medicine. I think it's also important for basic researchers in psychology, cognitive neuroscience, AI, and beyond. I now come to the third point, the difficult question of identifying trends in current research that might lead scientists to overstep ethical boundaries, and the resulting, even more difficult question of how to minimize these risks. At first glance, one might perceive stricter rules and top-down controls as a straightforward solution. It could also be argued that basic research, or more accurately curiosity-driven research, which operates outside the established canon at the frontiers of knowledge and requires a maximum degree of freedom, is particularly challenging to control. What is the right approach to achieve ethical standards in research in general? Yes, the explicit formulation of ethical standards, such as Declaration of Helsinki and the obligatory involvement of ethics committees, are of course crucial for all research studies. In addition, however, we as researchers must also avoid simply delegating responsibility to other institutions. In fact, that could even be counterproductive. Instead, we should also hold scientists, us, accountable ourselves. The academic freedom guaranteed in Article 5 of the German Basic Law does not exist without responsibility. This means we should empower everyone to ask themselves the crucial ethical questions. Researchers should be capable of reflecting beyond the boundaries of existing knowledge and identifying risks in their respective fields. Research must impose its own limits. However, this process should not occur in isolation, but must be transparent and in constant dialogue with society, ensuring external assessment at all times. There are some good examples for this. In 2019, Max Planck Society released a statement on genome editing, strongly opposing the modification of the human germline based on the current state of knowledge. This stance goes actually beyond the position of the German Ethics Council in its statement that same year, and I believe actually for a good reason. In addition, we should encourage all parties involved to adhere to the highest moral principles throughout continuous information, education, and maximum transparency. This also includes communicating the importance of our democratic constitution, which places distinct boundaries on our scientific freedom by prioritizing respect for human dignity and basic rights. Given a global situation where key nations do not share our fundamental values, it is particularly important for professionals, including researchers like us, to possess the foresight and sensitivity to identify the ethical boundaries of our own research. The new Lancet report provides crucial insights to continually renew and improve this sensitivity and hopefully also increase resilience of researchers to possible external pressures. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much, Professor Fillinger, for this strong commitment. We would like to hear from the German federal political institutions. We have invited statements, and we will first hear from the chair of the German Ethics Council, Professor Alena Büchs. Professor Büchs, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. So Professor Büchs has been since 2018 the director of the Institute for the History and Ethics of Medicine and professor for Ethics of Medicine and Health Technologies at the Medical School at the Technische Universität Munich. Since 2020, she's been the chair of the German Ethics Council. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor Büchs.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for this impressive work and impressive report. And allow me to start with a personal remark. I'm here as the chair of the German Ethics Council, but I'm also a professor of medical ethics. And as such, since my student days, I've had the privilege, Dr. Reinhardt has mentioned this, to work at institutes of medical ethics. And I have learned from colleagues in the history of medicine who did research on the unspeakable horrors and crimes that we have already heard about today and that you work on in this report. And yet, when I was asked in 2014 as a very young professor at Kiel University to give an overview of what happened in German medicine during Nazism and the Holocaust, as a layperson, I am not a historian, I will never forget the feeling of horror in the face of what had happened in the history. And I remember having nightmares for weeks, and I felt a deep sense of shame on behalf of my profession, the medical profession. And this shame has never left me. It has lingered. It has remained as it should. I have been teaching medical ethics for more than 20 years now, and I always do it the same way. I start with a slide that shows a photograph of the Nuremberg doctors' trial. As many of you will know, it's case one in the subsequent Nuremberg proceedings following the war criminals trials. And I briefly, again, as a lay person, introduce my students to some of what happened in German medicine during Nazism and the Holocaust. And I tell them, I emphasize that the field of medical ethics, my field, can be seen, at least partly, as a response to what happened back then. And that it is our professional duty to educate the medical profession, medical students, young researchers, to help understand the principles of ethics that have been developed further developed and further implemented following the Nuremberg trials, and to make sure that something like this can never happen again. And I see the organization, the institution that I have the great privilege to lead, the German Ethics Council, also as one of the organizations in this tradition to emphasize these ethical principles that we apply today and have been applying now for decades in the field of biomedicine and the life sciences. The German Ethics Council is tasked with addressing the questions of ethics, society, science, medicine, and law, and the probable consequences for the individual and for society that result in connection with research and development, in particular in the field of the life sciences and medicine, and their application to humanity. As such, we look to the future and we ask the question, what could be risks for ethical practice in medicine or in research? And we do so applying this to very many different interventions into the human genome, embryo research, assisted suicide, but also into measures of public health, most recently into the pandemic. The chair of the German Council of Jews, Josef Schuster, Dr. Josef Schuster, is a member of the German Ethics Council, and we try to represent a very wide set of society. We look towards the future, but we do use the principles that were written down in the Nuremberg Codex and also in the Declaration of Helsinki. We've heard about this already from Dr. Enabulele and others. The principles of patient autonomy and informed consent, both in research and in practice, of non-maleficence, of beneficence, of justice, of risk-benefit analysis, of proportionality, and many others. And we always, to every topic that we look at, we apply these principles, we work with them, we analyze and we discuss them over and over again. And in this regard, the report that the Lancet Commission has given us today is a wonderful and extremely helpful and extremely rigorous foundation for the future of our work. And I am looking forward to discuss the report with my colleagues in the Council. It's not only extremely important and a great source for our future discussions, the report is also extremely timely. As some of you will know, healthcare institutions, institutions of government, and also the German Ethics Council are routinely accused of engaging in activities that are called or likened to activities that happened in Nazi medicine, and routinely called to be brought in front of tribunals of Nuremberg 2.0 by the extreme right in Germany. This has happened in the context of the pandemic, but it has continued, and it is happening now in other public health contexts. This is extremely concerning. It represents a gross reinterpretation of current public health discussions, but even more importantly, it is a completely unacceptable relativization of the atrocious, heinous crimes that we have heard so much about today. And we cannot allow that, not as the German Ethics Council, but also not as German society. And so the report that you have given us is particularly relevant, and it becomes even more relevant against the background of the war in Israel and the terrible terrorist attack by Hamas on the 7th of October and following. The German Ethics Council is deeply committed to not allowing the crimes that the Lancet Commission has so deeply investigated and laid in front of us in this wonderful report to be belittled and relativized. we are also deeply committed to stand together against the re-emerging anti-Semitism that we have seen for a long time, but we see increasingly today. We must stand together as individuals and as society with everything that we have. Never again is now. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for your important work.
Now hear from Jürgen Dusel, the German Federal Government Commissioner for Matters Relating to Persons with Disabilities. Thank you so much, Jürgen Dusel.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your invitation, and I'm very honored and very grateful to share at the end of this conference, I guess, only a few words and some ideas and theses. First of all, I just want to say, yeah, my name is Jürgen Dusel. I'm the Federal Government Commissioner for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and I'm deeply honored to stand here, and I want to thank everybody who just worked on this report, of the Lancet report, because Professor Büchs already said it, it's really relevant right now. It's at the right time, and it's, for me, it's a very good paper to explain what I'm talking about when I'm talking about responsibility, knowing what happened in history and what means this for our responsibility to create the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to step back 40 years ago when I just finished my school education in the southwest of Germany near the University of Heidelberg. And there was a very famous speech by our former Federal President Richard von Weizsäcker at the 40th anniversary of the liberation from the Nazi regime. It was a speech he held in the Bundestag at the 8th of May 1985. And this speech not only influenced my life, I'm sure. Richard von Weizsäcker said that the young people, I was at this time 19 years old, not only the young people are not responsible what happened in the history, but they are responsible of the consequences of the history. And he was talking about responsibility and remembrance and creating the future on the bottom of this responsibility. And for me, of course, it started the responsibility to know what happened, really to know what happened. And I want, as the Commissioner of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, say that in the number of the millions of victims of the Holocaust, the men and women and the children, there were about 300,000 men, women and children with disabilities, especially with intellectual disabilities or with mental illness, who were killed, and more than 400,000 people with disabilities, persons with disabilities, who became victims of forced sterilization. And we have to know that behind every number there is a person. And to remember the person, I think it's very important, and to bring them into the light right now, because I think to tell stories about the victims, to tell stories of the persons is very important. And also important is that we not only take the focus of our interests and the responsibility, not only take the focus on the victims, because of course the victims are the most important, but we also have to put the focus on the perpetrators, of the doctors and the medical professionals who made this. And we have to understand that this inhuman horror ideological didn't appear at January 33, and it was not over in May 45. We also have to remember this. And we are talking about doctors who spoke the Hippocratic Oath after their education at the university, and they broke it thousands and thousands of times. And we're talking about professionals in the medical sector who changed from persons who were educated for helping and assisting and supporting and comforting people to people who killed them, administrated these horrible things. And we also know that part of the doctors, after the so-called euthanasia program, the T4, they just moved to the east, to the concentration camps, and became murdered in the Holocaust, in Auschwitz, in Majdanek, in Treblinka, and so on. And Dr. Traub said it, the horror wasn't over after the war, because the survivors of, for example, the T4 project, they just met, some of them, in the 15 years in the west part of Germany, when we're talking about compensation of that, what happens. So, ladies and gentlemen, to be clear that our responsibility never ends. And the shame, Professor Pick said, will not go away. That's the part of our history, and that's the most important thing, that we don't forget that we have to do everything that it never happens again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jürgen Dusel. And now I would like to invite my very dear friend and co-chair, Shmuel Rice, to give us his closing remarks.
Before moving to the closing remarks, I would like all the commissioners and members of the Student Advisory Committee who are here with us to stand up and be acknowledged. I would like also to acknowledge the 4 commissioners from Israel who couldn't make it here, Tessa Schlush, Miriam Ofer, Avi Ori, and Mati Fox. And then also it's time to acknowledge the generous sponsors that supported our work, which include the Israel Medical Association, the Azrieli Foundation, la Fondation pour la Mémoire de la Shoah, the Avram Herman Research Institute of Contemporary Jewry in Hebrew U, the Vienna Medical Association, the Max Planck Society, the German Association for Internal Medicine, the German Association for Psychiatry, and the German Association for Pediatrics. They all deserve also, I think, an applause. For concluding remarks, I almost have no words, because we have imagined this launch and mulled over its program forever and looked at every detail, and we're expecting the worst. And actually, you don't know that almost to the last moment before we started today, we had challenge after challenge and after challenge and after challenge, and what has happened is beyond any imagination and beyond any expectation. And I think the strength of the different validations and commitments that we have heard, actually we can say from everywhere, because it's the World Medical Association and 3 National Medical Associations and all the distinguished institutions here in Germany. And as I say, I think we are going to work very hard because there will be so much to do with so much commitment, and 2024 is going to be a great year, I hope. And I want to acknowledge my illustrious co-chairs for their support and containment at times. Thank you very much.